Valencia y Barcelona. Infórmate grupovaughan.com o 91-133-5833.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Western Civilization, from Mesopotamia to Silicon Valley. You are listening to Vaughan Radio, and my name is Guy Williams. All right. On the first part of the program, I was talking about this idea of evolution by natural selection and how Wallace and Darwin, both of them influenced by the essay on population by Thomas Malthus and by the new theory of geology and botany, some of the great developments in the field of botany, how all of this had come together simultaneously for both of them, and Wallace had been the first to publish a reasonable explanation for all of this. Darwin, horrified by the implications of what he had discovered, sat on it for decades, didn't want to publish it. He had taken copious notes, but he didn't like what he inevitably was going to have to do. The idea in Catholicism, you have the weight of the church itself and all of the believers that make up the church and the church hierarchy. At the pinnacle of the hierarchy, you have the Pope. You have all of this, and you have so many years of history, and this forms an enormous bulk, which the doctrine and the all of it, the years and years, the centuries, the millennia of interpretation, all of it is exceptionally important, and all of it is actually more important than what is written in the Bible itself. Now, under Luther, all of that is sort of considered irrelevant. And the idea is that it is possible for any individual to know God's will, the Word of God. It is possible as an individual to experience that. But of course, you need the Word of God, you need the Bible to be able to do that. This gives absolute prominence to the Bible. And so, in the beginning of Protestantism, it was considered necessary to be literate, necessary to try and interpret this yourself. Not go, maybe listen to advice, listen to priests and so forth, but ultimately, it was you, God, and the Bible. That's the only thing that counts. Now, if the Bible is considered to be somehow untrue, then this calls into question pretty much everything for a Protestant, not necessarily for a Catholic, but definitely for a Protestant. And so there are still biblical fundamentalists today who believe that every single word in the Bible is true. And if you try to convince them otherwise, you are wasting your time. So yes, naturally both Wallace and Darwin were Protestants, I imagine both Anglicans, and members of the Church of England, right, that founded by Henry VIII. And so this was catastrophic in terms of its implication for religion, religiosity, for belief, for faith. And one of the reasons that Darwinism, well, in the United States, Darwinism was exceptionally controversial and still is. There are schools that would not teach it. That would not teach evolution by natural selection because it's still considered too controversial. Now, Wallace and Darwin were not together regarding the evolution of human beings. Darwin's perspective obviously does not require a supernatural explanation. It's the law of desperation. All throughout nature, you have animals living in terror about predators, and at the same time, predators with this idea that there will not be enough food. And in both cases, they're right? The moment you least expect it, the moment you're not paying attention, the moment you are not sufficiently paranoid enough, the predator comes and ends your life. So yes, billions and billions of animals all around the planet living in terror. And of course, the predator, because many animals are both predator and prey, presa, no? Prey. Again, this idea that there will not be enough. You will not be able to reproduce, and then your life ends after you reproduce, because it's no longer valid. I mean, the thing, we talk about the survival of the fittest, de los más aptos, pero no, the level of survival we know today, what is being propagated is the genetic material. As long as the genes are put back into the mix, then the life is considered complete. And so after the age of procreation, there really is very little purpose to keep on living. And so animals normally die after they procreate. Presumably, older people among human beings, because human beings are practically unique in that children cannot defend themselves. Children are helpless, and children need extensive time being protected. And so this is presumably the reason that human beings live a little longer than necessary in order to procreate. But remember that for most of human history, an average age of 30 or a little later, maybe 40 years, that would have been it for most people. In any case, all of this, the implications are clear, and so you can imagine the controversy. Now, Wallace's view was that human evolution uniquely is a teleological process. In other words, like Aristotle, the purpose is at the end, right? Aristotle talking about the idea that la bellota, no? La bellota quiere ser roble, just like the acorn wants to be a tree. That is its purpose. That is its teleology. Its destiny. Well, human beings have a sort of a providential destiny. And again, many people could have gone from Darwin to Wallace, getting the best of both worlds. But, yeah, this idea of teleology, this idea of an inevitable end, this has been around in German philosophy especially. For example, Kant saying that the human beings are meant to live in communities. Of course, this is what Aristotle is saying, but Kant takes it further and says that human beings are meant to live in nations. And so that the nation is the element in which humans can be genuinely human. Now, okay, Wallace sort of self-educated and self-financed and without the connections that Darwin had, not having gone to Oxford or Cambridge. The fact is that he discovered all sorts of things. I mean, his exploration in the Amazon and in what is today Malaysia they allowed him to discover species of fish, 3 species of fish, 5 species of bird, 2 species of mammals, 6 arthropods, all sorts of different things that make him one of the greatest explorers, one of the greatest scientists of his time. But again, a victim of discrimination precisely because of his lack of connections. Because he wasn't a member of the aristocracy. I mean, Darwin was connected to the Wedgwood family. You know, the Wedgwood ceramic family. They became so popular during the 18th and into the 19th century. Wedgwood ware is still highly valued. So yes, the second half of the 19th century and 20th century and even 21st century, all of that, the level of open-mindedness that one has. For example, in Spain, officially, yes, you have the scientific community reading Darwin and believing in Darwin, but not able to say it in public. The only manifestation of Darwinism was was actually anise. Anise del mono. The monkey in the anise del mono, the monkey has Darwin's face on it, right? It is a monkey with Darwin's face. In other words, this is a kind of a caricature laughing at Darwinism. And if I remember correctly, under that you have a kind of a bubble, a balloon, where Darwin is saying, "Es lo mejor. La ciencia lo dice y no miente." In other words, again, caricature, ridicule. But this, believe it or not, this continued, and even in times of the dictatorship of Franco, in which, again, Darwinism was spoken about in universities, but not actually taught, or at least not in front of large numbers of people. In any case, all of that, the Anís del Mono was exceptionally popular all through this silence about Darwinism. First, the idea that it is in direct contradiction to the version of creation in the Bible, which, as I say, to modern Catholics is no problem whatsoever. If I remember correctly, they say it's the truth, but not the literal truth, right? In any case, implying that living creatures and human beings rise and fall exclusively controlled by physical law. In other words, there is very little room there for free will, libre albedrío, right? Free will. Now, it definitely offended people by arguing that human beings were descended from some kind of evolutionary ancestor, about the apes, right, the simians. Another reason that Darwin was sort of reluctant, unwilling to publish was that he personally was relatively shy, did not want controversy, did not want to stand up for his theories, did not want to get into arguments. There were other people around that were all too willing to argue. There were other people who went around. This is something very common in the 19th century, to go to public lectures and to get paid for giving public lectures and to live off of giving public lectures about Darwinism, going into towns. And you had one at the meeting of the British Association. This was in 1861 in Oxford, where Thomas Huxley, the scientist, and Samuel Wilberforce, a bishop, Anglican bishop, arguing for and against Darwin, respectively. The idea was that, this had been proven in a way that was incontrovertible, right? And that whatever Wilberforce said, lifting up the Bible and saying this is the truth, that it considered behind the times, that civilization had progressed enough not to be able to think of it as the literal truth. Now, this, as I say, this has been a long time generating in the West and is still considered rather controversial because of the many, many people who reject Darwin's ideas. And there are people who are frightened of the ways in which Darwin's ideas have been abused. Because, of course, almost immediately you have somebody like the historian Herbert Spencer talking about the rise and fall of civilizations, as if civilizations rose and fell because of their fitness. At one point they're young and strong, and then later they become decadent, and later they begin to fail. This idea, which has been around for a long, long time, this idea which, it's been around since the Middle Ages. but now with a Darwinian twist, used later on in the 20th century to justify, for example, cultural superiority of Europe over areas that had been conquered and colonized, or racial superiority, because almost immediately what Darwin was saying was adapted to the difference between races, and justifying, for example, eugenics, how it was going to be necessary for the best examples, the fittest, to be able to reproduce, and those that are degenerate should be prevented from reproducing. All of this enormously popular, and all of this continuing late into the 20th century. There's still forced sterilizations in Scandinavia and places like that, even until the 1960s. This idea continuing and basing itself on Darwin's theories. But of course, Darwin is not responsible for that. And of course, some people prefer science. Science, the opposite of belief. Science that tries to disprove the hypothesis. In other words, unlike a credo, unlike something faith, that based on faith, the scientific hypothesis is improved when it is invalidated. So all scientists are working hard to disprove their hypothesis. And this is how science advances. In theory, every scientist wishes that the working hypothesis on which he's basing his experiments is not true, can be invalidated, because that will inevitably lead to a hypothesis that is closer to what is observed. And the fact is that, many scientists, they're not immune to stories, to legends, to miraculous things. For example, back in the ancient world, Pythagoras, there are as many miracles and strange things attributed to him as to any of the medieval saints. In the Leyenda Dorada, for example, they say that he had a magical arrow from Apollo that allowed him to fly, that Pythagoras persuaded a bull not to eat beans, because, of course, beans are one of the components of metempsychosis, that reincarnation. Beans, right? Frijoles, judías, alubias. Beans have the potential to become human beings, and so we should not touch them. Of course, they say that he was bitten by a snake, a poison snake, a venomous snake, that he bit it back and it died. There were many times when Pythagoras was seen in two places at once, the gift of ubiquity. And when he crossed the river Casas, the waters separated for him to cross, and the river called him by his name. All of these accretions, all of these